Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Silva. Thank you for joining me for this talk on how to properly measure your blood pressure. I just wanted to record a quick introduction to explain why I didn't re-record this very old video. It's an old video and it's got pretty bad lighting and it's rough. But I didn't re-record it because in the video, just serendipitously, I measure my blood pressure and then there's the need to remeasure it. And I'm able to explain why I needed a remeasurement. It just worked out very perfectly, and it's such an important thing to get accurate readings. That's what this whole video is about, how to do it properly. And so, there's no way to recreate that. And so I tried to polish it off a little bit, but that's why. And that's why I didn't re-record it. But also, I just want to say that this video is best watched in the context of the playlist on hypertension about the silent killer, how you can't feel your blood pressure. You don't know when it's elevated. If you have a headache, if you feel poorly because you're stressed out, that is a correlate. And yeah, sure, your blood pressure might be elevated at that time, but you're not feeling the actual elevation in blood pressure. Most people that are walking around hypertensive don't know it. They don't feel anything. And that's why it's so dangerous, because they go years and years like that, and then they end up with all kinds of cardiovascular problems. And some people are ticking time bombs. Anyway, please check out this playlist in its entirety if you're watching this, and please excuse the roughness here of the video that follows. But everyone should own a home blood pressure cuff, a home sphygmomanometer, as I say in the video, and everyone should be measuring their blood pressure periodically. Thanks for watching.
I wanted to show the correct way to take your blood pressure. This is my favorite brand, Omron. I've bought many home sphygmomanometers, is the term for a blood pressure cuff. Sphygmomanometer, I love that word. But Omron is really the #1 recommended brand by doctors, 4 to 5 dentists. And I've bought many. This is a higher end model on sale right now, so I wouldn't spend that much money, but you can see that it is Bluetooth compatible and it will talk to your smartphone. You want the blood pressure cuff to fit properly. You do want an arm cuff, not a wrist cuff, and it needs to be at heart level. And you want to be resting, you want to be quiet. I don't know if it makes a difference or not, but you're supposed to uncross your legs, and it is important to be quiet and be still, because the machine is actually auscultating your pulse, just like when a doctor or a nurse uses a stethoscope and they're actually listening for the bruise, which is the sound of the blood coursing. That's the proper positioning. You always want some of the machines have an actual tube. They're not self-contained like this, and so they're connected to the monitor and the sounds are being transmitted. So you want the tubing to be where the stethoscope would be placed. So yeah, this would be wrong. The blood is flowing this way, and so you want the sensing device to be positioned like that. And so then you just sit still and think about pleasant things. You shouldn't measure your blood pressure if you want to get accurate readings when you're stressed, when you're angry, when you're anxious. You'll get elevated readings, and you could get a trend because you're only measuring it when you're upset. And people will say that they can tell when their blood pressure is up. Well, you can't. You can tell when you're stressed and angry and when you have a headache, and many times your blood pressure will be increased in those moments, but you can't feel your blood pressure. And there's a whole other video that talks about that. The more important point is that your blood pressure could be problematically high and you feel fine. So if you don't feel well, it's often up, especially if you have issues with your blood pressure, and specifically stress hormones, but you won't necessarily feel it. So you can see there that 124/92. So that's problematic. And actually, I'm going to take it again. And this is a good point because 124 is pretty good. It's not, it used to be considered fine. Now we really want it to be 120 or less. But 92, and the diastolic number is more important. It's more important what the pressure is when the heart is resting. So the systolic is when the heart beats, and then when it contracts, and then when the heart relaxes, it's the pressure in the arteries, that rebound pressure. And if that is more important clinically, and so when that is 90 or 100, that's really bad. And so we're going to do it again, and actually I'm going to demonstrate that when you do remeasure, it's probably a good idea to switch arms. I don't know how much that would really affect things, but in as much as we were just impeding blood flow on the other side, and it's just get a fresh start, do it on the other arm. The anatomy is slightly different on this side because no one's perfectly symmetric, but also give this arm a rest. So when you remeasure, you should switch to the other arm. Again, arm machines are much more accurate than the wrist ones. So if you're going to invest, you might as well. They don't even cost that much more, but I feel that they're more accurate. I really don't know what the research shows. I haven't studied it, but I'm going to be dogmatic about it and recommend that you let the machine listen to larger arteries. Now, I'm talking, in theory, those sound waves could be interfering. Certainly the doctor would be telling me to shut up if it were a real person. See? So I got a completely different reading this time, and this one I trust more, and I trust it more, not just because it's a better reading and I'm invested in being healthy, but because a reading of 124, which is pretty good, almost normal, and 94, which is very high, very problematic, they don't correlate. That's called the pulse pressure, the difference. And if it's widened like that, there are conditions that result in a widened pulse pressure, but I don't believe it. Or if it's the other way around, if you've got 160 over 70, that doesn't make sense. How could you have such high blood pressure when your heart contracts and then it falls that much to well below normal at rest? And again, I'm not a cardiologist, but I do remember studying in medical school about certain conditions where you would see a widened pulse pressure, but I couldn't even tell you what those conditions were. The bottom line is, if the numbers don't match, if they're not both slightly high or significantly high or slightly low or significantly low, if they're off, if you measure your blood pressure on a regular basis and you get a number that's just not typical for you, it's an outlier, then you should repeat the measurement. And people who are really compulsive about it, there are even machines that will feature an option where you measure your blood pressure and it asks for 3 measurements and then it averages those. So it improves accuracy. But I think that's a little overkill. You could still get a weird value in one of those 3 and that would throw off the measurement. You're better just to use proper technique and do it often enough that you can develop a sense for when you get a bad reading. And a lot of the really good machines will abort and will give you an error if the machine didn't get a very clear indication of when the blood stopped flowing because of the amount of pressure that was being applied. And that's the systolic value, the amount of pressure necessary to force blood through that constriction. And then when the bruise stops, when the blood flowing completely freely and there's no more turbulence, the bruise will stop, and that tells you what the pressure is when the heart's at rest.